I'm Steph.
And I'm Jeff. Each week, we review a film that's streaming on Netflix or Amazon Prime.
As writers, we'll deep dive into the hook, plot, characters, and ending to tell you if it's a good story.
Listen at your own risk. This review contains spoilers.
Now sit back
Relax
and
enjoy
enjoy
Stream
Stream
On.
On. Today, we'll be reviewing Starship Troopers, streaming on Tubi.
In the 23rd century, the Earth is run by the United Citizens Federation, a militarized interstellar empire. In the depths of space, they find the arachnids, hostile alien bugs. Conflict soon follows, and a group of young soldiers find themselves on the front line of an interstellar war with the future of mankind at stake.
Starship Troopers was directed by Paul Verhoeven. It was written by Edward Neumeier, and it's based on the Robert A. Heinlein 1959 sci-fi novel Starship Troopers. It stars Casper Van Dien as Johnny Rico, an infantry soldier, Denise Richards as Captain Carmen Ibanez, a pilot, Dina Meyer as Dizzy Flores, an infantry soldier, Jake Busey as Ace Levy, another infantry soldier, Neil Patrick Harris as Dr. Carl Jenkins, a military intelligence officer, and Michael Ironside as Razak, a teacher turned soldier. So, Jeff, this is a movie you chose. Why did you pick this one?
This is one of my favorite satires. I think this film is a brilliant dissection both of war movies and military culture. Paul Verhoeven is also one of my favorite directors. Movies like RoboCop and Total Recall are up there on my desert island list. But one reason I picked this is that I am a fan of the source novel. And the first time I saw this movie, I hated it. As a fan of the novel, I went into it going, great, we're going to see this pretty serious, gritty war movie with a bunch of, guys bounce around in power armor, tearing apart a bunch of spaceship flying arachnids and their humanoid skinny allies. And then I saw this movie, I'm like, whoa, there's basically none of that in here. This movie bothered me as a fan of the book. So, one of the reasons I picked this movie is that I think it's a good way to look at how people who have enjoyed a story in one format, how much that impacts their ability to enjoy it in another. So, Steph, what film did Starship Troopers remind you of?
I chose Ender's Game, the film with Harrison Ford in it, because it's also based on a military sci fi novel, that one by Orson Scott Card. And it's about a misunderstood alien race threatening Earth that humans make an enemy out of. So you've got that parallel. You also have violence is victory messaging throughout Ender's Game, and you get that in Starship Troopers as well. And they're training soldiers using propaganda and not telling them the full truth about the nature of the war they're fighting. You get that in both Ender's Game and in Starship Troopers. So I felt there were enough parallels that if you were a fan of Ender's Game, you might also like this movie. What about you, Jeff?
I chose Catch 22, another satire that uses the tropes of armed conflict to explore both the insanity inherent in war, but also look at the lengths that people go to both fight the enemy and to convince themselves that the other is the enemy.
Which version of Catch 22 are you referring to? Because I think there's been several film and TV adaptations of that book.
Good point. Yes, I was referring to the 1970 film version starring Alan Arkin.
Okay, so let's talk about the hook, Jeff. What were your thoughts about the first 15 minutes or so of this film?
I think that Verhoeven did a great job of setting up a world in which you have a bunch of vapid, shallow teens live in this sort of fascist, militarized, soft police state because it's not an oppressive society that's been set up, but is highly militarized. Verhoeven uses the setting of a civics class to give us a lot of exposition. Why the world is the way it is, how the military runs everything, and why everyone basically accepts that. We also get some propaganda videos, basically news clips, right, of the upcoming war and how the military is prepping the population for this conflict with the arachnids. There are a couple of things in the hook that don't work very well. We definitely did not need this extended football sequence, which seems to be there mainly to introduce one character and set up a kind of weak love triangle. I also didn't really like the first few minutes, which are basically an attack that takes place later in the movie. So we start with the invasion of Klendathu, which is the alien homeworld. We have a bunch of characters running around, people are getting killed, and it cuts and goes like, I don't know, a year earlier. And then we're reintroduced to all these characters. I'm not certain what the point of starting with that combat sequence was. I think that just having this with a more linear storyline, and especially in the hook, just like, hey, here are these high school students, and then the aliens attack, and then they become soldiers, would have worked a lot better. But overall, as far as setting up the world, as far as setting up the characters, such as they are, I think the hook does a good job. What did you think?
So I agree with you about starting with the battle on Clondathu. I don't think that was necessary. I think it's something that you often see directors do to try to grab their audience quickly. It's like a cheap way to like get someone invested by putting that like battle scene up front. But you had enough going on with setting up these characters, learning about the world, the videos, like the propaganda videos, that was enough to be interested in. You didn't need to start with the battle. So definitely agree with you on that. For the most part, the hook did its job for me. So I liked the Federal News Network mobile infantry propaganda videos. I thought that was a great example of straight satire and what the film was trying to do. It's straight satire on fascism, right? And you get some nice world building as a result of those videos on these alien bugs and what they're about and why we're fighting them, or ostensibly why we're fighting them. We meet our hero Johnny and his friends Carmen, Carl, and Dizzy. They've got. I agree. I like that classroom world building with Razak, and his violence solves problems messaging that is throughout the film. Like you can see these kids are being hooked on to the propaganda pretty quickly, and he's a well loved teacher. It sets up the Dizzy, Carmen, Johnny love triangle, which will follow throughout the film. And it sets up the tension between Johnny and his rich parents. He wants to join the military and they don't want him to. So you get that little bit of family tension. Uh, the thing I didn't like about the hook is this Xander character that they bring in. So he is set up to be this over the top, sleazy, macho guy, which I know the film has satire in it. So I felt they did that as like satire of a character like that. But I didn't like what they did with him in this film. So in The Hook, Carmen, who is dating Johnny, our main character, she falls for Xander like very quickly. Like she's smitten by him after watching him at a football game, and then she meets him at a dance later. And there's nothing that Xander does that's so impressive for her to fall for him so quickly and start flirting with him. And it seems like they use it as a cheap way to make Johnny jealous and the impetus for why he joins the military. because he's trying to stay with Carmen. But I don't think you needed Xander inserted in there to do that. I think he was so in love with Carmen, and they set that up pretty well, that he's way more into Carmen than she is into him. But he's so in love with her that he would have followed her into the military regardless. You didn't need Xander to get him there. And so I just felt that that was unnecessary. And he's in that football scene too that you didn't like. So it just took up screen time. We had enough characters to understand and get invested in. We didn't need him added. So, what are your thoughts on Xander and the hook?
Having him in the football game means he is the same age as the rest of these high school students, who are, of course, being played by people in their 30s, I think, but whatever. Movie. The weird thing, though, is that Carmen goes into the Federal Navy. She is the same age as Xander, yet she's just like in flight school, gets assigned to a starship, and he's already there as her instructor. That was that was weird. It was a strange.
Yeah, made no sense.
That just sets up a timeline issue of how this dude, who one presumes is 18-year old, just gets out of high school with the rest of these kids going to the military, and then he's a flight instructor, while the girl who is the same age is still in training. I don't know. It's not a big thing, but that bugged me. The main thing, though, is what you said. Xander is completely unnecessary. You already have a traditional love triangle. You don't need to add this guy to get a love quadrangle. And it just makes Carmen's character seem even dumber than she already seems because of how rapidly she just falls for this dude.
Right, just so fickle, or maybe she's purposely trying to make Johnny jealous, but it doesn't come across that way. So, yeah, I'm glad we're aligned on that. I'm just curious, since you read the book, is Xander in the book?
There are characters in the book whose names are ported over into the film. Johnny Rico is not having any relationships with Carmen. Carmen, I believe, is mentioned as one of his classmates, but that's about it. There is no love triangle. The book itself focuses much more on Johnny's growth from kid who decides to join the military and then kind of rises through the ranks, and then a lot of details go into like the training and stuff like that. But yeah, the whole love triangle stuff not has nothing to do with anything in the book.
That's interesting because I have not read the book, but I could tell these were characters inserted for the film because of how they were written. They weren't richly developed. And so I assumed it was because they weren't in the books.
So let's get into the plot. Steph, what were your thoughts on the plot?
Well, so as you know, as a writer, I like to pick on how the characters are written. And I have two that I want to pick on in this film. The first is Dizzy's character arc, and the second has to do with Xander as just a character in the story. So I'll start with Dizzy. So Dizzy is set up at the beginning of this film to be a tough, confident girl that likes to hang with the boys and can keep up with the boys. We see in that football scene that she is a part of the football team and one of the only girls on the team. And that she also, there's another scene early on where they're dissecting a bug in science class, and, Carmen is barfing and other people are having trouble. And she is like, this is no big deal, and dives in and starts pulling out the inners. So she's just like this tough girl that can handle a lot. And I liked her character. She also is very, like, she knows what she wants. She's into Johnny for some unknown reason, but she thinks he's a catch. And so she goes after that, and she lets him know that she likes him, like, up front. And I liked that confidence about her. And so she joins the military as well and becomes an infantry soldier, and she transfers into Johnny's unit. Johnny, because he's so high on himself, thinks she did it for him, versus her reason for transferring into the unit is because it's like it has a reputation of being the toughest, most badass unit, and she's a badass fighter. And Lastly, there's this scene that I could not stand. It's the Dizzy Johnny hookup scene. So she finally like gets her prize, right? They set Johnny up as the cookie for her. And it's like the highlight that she got to sleep with him and she loves him just during sex once. I mean, it just reduces this tough, strong female character to a girl that pines over Johnny. And as after she gets to hook up with Johnny, then they just kill her off. She dies in Johnny's arms, saying, basically, I'm dying, but it's all right because I got to have you. And she just deserves such a better story arc than this film gave her. And it really pissed me off as a feminist. Your thoughts, Jeff?
I think Dizzy's character and her development, if you want to call it that, is an example of the real weak point of this movie, which are the character. Any of the positive attributes that Dizzy has, or Caro, or Carmen, or any character, is pretty much happenstance and not thought from the writer. Because these characters are all a mess. They're either one dimensional, or they're not consistent, or like with Dizzy's death scene, which is mind numbingly stupid, where she is lying there, torn open, and she's not saying, "Get me a medic." She's saying, "At least I got to have sex with you, Johnny, before dying." Clearly, the writer saw the characters as meat puppets. They're basically there to go through the motions and do whatever a specific scene requires without any real thought to motivation, consistency, or even how baseline real people would interact, because that's not the point of the movie. The movie is supposed to be this satire on war films and also just a satirical look at the military and kind of militarized culture. It's okay to have your theme as the primary reason you're telling a story. Not every story has to be character driven. But even if your themes are the primary point of your story, if you're not taking time to make characters who are at least believable within the context of your story, it takes you out of the movie or the book or whatever story it is. And I think that goes to what you're saying, the problem with Dizzy's character arc. She doesn't have an arc, she has a bunch of random character points that all lead up to a groan inducing death because the writer didn't care about that. And yeah, it's also annoying that you have a character who is set up as a strong, confident female, which I also like writing, and then they completely blow it as at the end of their story or at the end of her character arc, just so that I don't even know why that was the writer's best shot at how to have a death scene with this character.
Yeah, it was literally she served her
Mhm.
purpose after she got to have sex with Johnny. And so it's like, kill her off now. She had sex with Johnny. That storyline's wrapped up. Now let's kill her. The other character I would like to talk about, and I understand that this is not a character driven story. So I agree with you in the sense that this is a satire on fascism and, an over militarized culture, but you do still have to have characters that work in that story that you care about somewhat. And so Xander's character, which I brought up in the hook as someone I had an issue with, continues to give me issues throughout this film as just a character that was unnecessary. Where Dizzy, I found a necessary character because of the love triangle you're setting up and to help keep Johnny motivated. Xander, on the other hand, I think you could have gotten rid of and it wouldn't have impacted your story. They dedicated way too much screen time to him as well in an already, big story with a lot of things moving through it. This whole flight instructor thing, I thought it was so weird how he ended up outranking Carmen so quickly, even though they're ostensibly the same age, didn't make sense. And it was also just really convenient that he shows up again as the flight instructor. I mean, they set up the fleet to be pretty big. He just happens to be her instructor. Okay, that's very plotty. They use it as a way for Carmen to break up with Johnny. And that also bugged me because Carmen could have just broken up with Johnny on her own because of distance. They're far away from each other in space because of career. She wants to focus a lot more on her career. And she says that, but they imply that it was because Xander's back in the picture that she's breaking up with Johnny, and you didn't need it. And then they end up being co pilots, but you didn't need him as the co-pilot. Didn't add anything. You could have just had some rando co-pilot. It's Carmen's story, so it didn't really matter who her co-pilot was in these plasma bug battles. And then lastly, they do use him when they crash on the bug planet and he gets his brain sucked out by the brain bug. But I think you could have had the same effect with a nameless pilot in that scene getting their brains sucked out. Like, I didn't care that it was Xander that was getting his brain sucked out because I wasn't invested in him as a character. Why dedicate so much screen time to this character that didn't matter is beyond me.
First, I agree, Xander was unnecessary. There was a story that could have worked here. There's nothing wrong with having a love triangle, and having the Carmen, Dizzy, Johnny triangle would have been fine as a kind of personal investment for the audience in the lives of these characters, something beyond just the big themes. It probably would have helped if you had better actors. Casper Van Dien and Denise Richards are pretty to look at, but they don't really have much emotional range. Dina Meyer, I think, is fine as Dizzy. I mean, she's probably, other than maybe Michael Ironside, is probably the best actor in the film. But even with casting aside, there was raw materials there for an interesting character interactions. It just seemed like somewhere along the development process, somebody said, hey, let's have some of these characters want to sleep with each other. Okay, well, why and how do we actually develop a plausible story that's dramatically and investing for the audience? And it's like, this movie is mostly about blowing up giant bugs. We just want to see some boobs. I don't think it went much beyond that because these characters, they are not well developed, and it seems very random a lot of the things they do. And it is, again, the worst part of this film.
Yeah, it felt like they wrote the plot and then added the characters in later after they sketched out their plot and the satire they wanted to use throughout the film, and then they were like, okay, well now let's put in our characters and figure out how they're gonna weave into this plot.
And I think what you said is kind of the direction the movie should have gone. You have the break between Johnny and Carmen is because she wants the military as a career. He did it because he followed her in, but if you want to give him a little more agency, it could just be that I'm going to do my, like a 4-year tour or whatever, become a full citizen, then go into my dad's business. It's just a career move for me. It doesn't have to be any great dramatic reason. That's reasonable in the world they set up. And then she could just be like, well, I'm going to be in space and I'm going to be an officer and I want to ship my own. And you're going to go back and run your dad's siding business. That would be a good way to break the characters up. With Dizzy, if you really want a tragic death, well, first, you could have subverted expectations and have Johnny killed and then follow Dizzy as she rises through the ranks, which I would have loved. But if Dizzy has to die, at least make it something with more impact.
Yeah, and I think we agree on that point. What else do you have to say about the plot, Jeff?
The satire works. This is a really good look at the cliches of war movies, and but also just whether it's military culture or how kind of like a soft fascism works. I think Verhoeven does a very good job of that, and the writer Newmeyer, I think they do a nice job of using the plot to kind of show how a society like that would function. It's also does a good job of looking at how fascism flourishes in an over militarized culture or in a culture that glorifies the military. Verhoeven was looking at the United States and the West in general and saying, the way you guys treat the military and the way you glorify war, the propaganda that your media pushes and your pop culture pushes is taking you in this direction of a national security state and a country where the military or quasi military groups run everything and the citizenry is kept fat and happy, but also just has no power and doesn't seem to care about much that happens beyond the tip of their nose, as exemplified by Johnny's parents. Even with Johnny, you have a character who is shown to be, very shallow. He joins the military for a girl. He's about to leave because suffers a significant setback because he gets somebody killed, but apparently not one that would have gotten him kicked out of the military. But he's going to leave anyway until Buenos Aires is flattened by a meteor, and then suddenly it becomes personal, which is a trope of war movies and action movies, but doesn't say anything really great about this character or most of the characters in the society. As a tool for looking at those kind of issues, I think the film works well. Did the satire work for you?
Yeah, the satire did its job. Like, I think that those propaganda videos that they filtered throughout the film really helped drive the satire components of it. And I thought they were well done. So I got the straight satire. I didn't watch it missing that. I know some people, they talk about how some people really hated this movie, and it's because they didn't get the satirical elements. I got the satirical elements the first time watching it. That wasn't it for me. My issue was the characters because, as you know, I like rich characters and interesting characters, and I really focus on how they develop in a film or story. And when the characters don't develop in ways I like, I tend to rank films lower. So this is another example where I just was, even though the satire worked, the characters didn't.
You mentioned that there were people who didn't like this, didn't get the satire, thought it was a terrible movie for those reasons. As I'd mentioned, I didn't like this the first time I saw it because I went into it expecting this is going to be like the book I read. I assume at least some of the people who didn't like this movie approached it from the direction I did, is that we like the source material. Even when I first saw it, I recognized it as satire because it's kind of hard not to. But on that first viewing, that was not enough to overcome my dislike because I like that book so much. As a kid, Starship Troopers was like on my yearly rotation of sci-fi novels. I've probably read that book 15 times. I love it. It is one of the best military SF books out there. When you consume a story in a different format, an adaptation, reimagining, or even just a different way of telling a story, words on a page versus images on a screen, do you find that you like or dislike something more because of the source material that you are already exposed to?
So I do find that that sometimes happens. A good example, I'll reference a podcast we had done in the past, was A Man Who Fell to Earth. I read the book and I really liked the book. It's a great sci-fi novel by Walter Tevis, who, for those that are fans of the Queen's Gambit, that's where that story came from, is Walter Tevis as well. So when I watched the movie with David Bowie, I was like, oh, compared to the book, I like the book so much better. And I understand that the movie version is an acquired taste, but maybe I would have liked the movie version better if I had not read the original source material of the novel. But sometimes it goes the other way. For example, trying to think of a good one. Lord of the Rings. I've read those books, but I like the movies better than the books. I found the books just go like on and on describing the scenery, and I'm like over it by the third page of them describing their trek. So sometimes the movie is better than the book, in my opinion, but I do think the source material alters how you look at that. I watched the Lord of the Rings movies though prior to reading the books. So that's maybe that has something to do with it as I saw the movie first. But yeah, it does impact how you view a film if you have any experience with the source material either before or after that film.
I had the same experience with Lord of the Rings, although I read the books long before I saw the movies. But I found the books to be overstuffed and at times ponderous because of the discipline necessary to tell a story within a manageable amount of time on the screen. You have to cut a lot of stuff out and streamline your narrative. If you consume specific works but in different forms, so in this case, a fairly serious, straightforward military science fiction book versus a over the top, tongue in cheek military satire film, you always have to take the narrative that you are consuming on its own terms and try not to bring in the baggage that you have from the work you were first exposed to. You mentioned The Man Who Fell to Earth. I love that movie, but I also saw the movie multiple times before I read the book. I like the book as well, but they're very different beasts. And I do think that if you read the book first, you could look at the movie and go, this is a mess. Why didn't you stick with the more straightforward narrative in the book? It's just something that, as consumers of stories, we always have to be aware of and to really try to take each story on its own terms and own merits. And with this film, when I first saw it, I didn't do that. And it led to a really bad first viewing experience.
None of us approach a story as like tabula rasa, right? We all come in with preconceived ideas, our own ways of viewing things. If we have been exposed to the story in another format, we're going to have that there. We're not blank slates when even if we haven't read the book before, if you come into a story with a certain mindset, me being a social worker, right, a clinical social worker, and having that mindset of viewing the world psychologically as well as socioculturally, I'm going to apply that lens when I watch a movie and look at characters. I can't separate myself completely from that lens, and it's going to impact what I think of a film. Same with you being a history major and a studier of lots of different periods of history. When you watch a film, you're probably going to have that lens looking at it. So we can't necessarily divorce ourselves from that, but we can be mindful of it as we're watching a film to not let it overly cloud our experience with the film or story. Okay, so let's talk about the ending, Jeff. What are your thoughts about how this film wrapped up?
For me, the ending is a mixed bag. Elements of it are anticlimactic, specifically the capture of this alien brain bug is done by this character that we basically haven't seen for 2/3 of the movie, and he just shows up. However, if you do look at this in keeping with just a satire of the military and these kind of movies, I think it's fine. You get that kind of rah rah moment where the heroes win and capture the enemy, and the propaganda film clips we get right at the end of the film are all about the new fleet is ready and we're going to take the war to them and massacre all these poor aliens who apparently are just going about their lives until they met humans and then everything got messed up. So, what did you think? Did the ending work for you?
It's a mixed bag for me as well. So, what did work, and you mentioned this already, was the final propaganda video with Carmen, Ace, and Johnny. I thought it was a nice touch to drive home the satirical message of the film about the danger of fascism and creating that us versus them mentality between the humans and the bugs, like reducing your enemy literally to soulless bugs, right? I mean, that was very on the nose. The might is right, all of that. Like, that was well done to fit with the satire in the film. What didn't work for me is a couple of those other moments. The Deus ex machina moment, where Carl, as the psychic military intelligence officer, helps Johnny rescue Carmen from the brain bug. Like, they just, he's a side character and they bring him in to lead Johnny to go rescue Carmen. I mean, it was a little too convenient, that whole thing. We're supposed to believe this psychic plot line that wasn't well developed at all throughout the story. And it's fine. I get we're in a sci-fi world, but if you're going to have a psychic plot line that leads to the main primary ending, you have to have it better developed than what they did with Neil Patrick Harris's character. And then you've got what you already spoke about. So this drill sergeant, Zim, who we meet when Johnny is going through his training, now comes back as Private Sim. Somehow he went from a drill sergeant to a private. Like, I mean, I was in the army. That doesn't make sense to me. Their whole ranking structure didn't make sense. Like, why? Another aside related to that is Neil Patrick Harris's character, the doctor. He's like a colonel. How in the he's their age? How did he become a colonel so quickly? Also strange. I mean, they just have a weird ranking structure in this military. And so now he's Private Zim, the drill sergeant guy, and he's the one that captures the brain bug. I wrote in my notes, WTF, like with a question mark. Why? Like, why don't we have Johnny, our hero, do it? Like, or even Razak do it, like have somebody else do it versus Zim. I mean, it just felt like really lazy writing. So that was all the stuff that didn't work about it. It's the ending saved itself a little because of the satire propaganda video at the end.
So, Steph, what was your favorite scene?
So it's really a collection of scenes, but they all tie together. So I liked the Federal News Network propaganda videos. I mean, they were just some really clever ones that made me laugh. You had the kids squishing the bugs. It's like everyone's doing their part to help the war effort, and kids are squishing cockroaches. You have this scene where soldiers are handing children Berettas like a toy, like it's a fun thing to do. There's this guy, he's set up to sort of be this like country bumpkin type character, like the only good bug is a dead bug. And then there was this really funny one with the talking heads, and it's set up to be like a conservative slash liberal talking heads debating about if bugs can be intelligent. It's just really funny and reminds me of a typical like news show today where you purposely choose people with opposing viewpoints to create drama in your news show, your opinion news show. And so I just thought all of that was very well done. Uh, those are the most enjoyable scenes to me throughout the film. What about you, Jeff?
I'm going to be really boring and say the exact same thing. The propaganda videos are far and away the best part of the film for succinctly and explicitly reinforcing the primary themes. I would also give a nod to the special effects. The CG work, especially being a mid 90s movie, is really good. All the bug scenes are neat, the spaceships are cool. The movie looks good, but just as far as best scenes, definitely the propaganda videos. So, what did you like the least?
So the scenes with the bug battles to me got long and repetitive. I don't mind action scenes. They can be great in a movie, especially war ones if orchestrated well. But if they go on too long and you have enough of them that are too similar, it gets boring. And that's what I found happened in this film. The planet Clandethu invasion, I mean, we see it twice, right? We see it at the beginning of the film and then partway through. It's boring to watch it a second time. And it goes on way too long. I stopped caring about it because of how long it went on. There's another bug battle where Johnny takes out one of the big bugs, and that's long, and there's a lot of like over the top green goo spraying out. It was just comical, and how much green goo was coming out. The Planet P Outpost battle, because again, I got bored because it stretched on. And then you have two different fleet battles going on with the bug plasma, like shooting out into space and taking them down. And they look the exact same to me. It's almost like they just used the same CGI and then used it again. Like it was just so similar. I'm like, I feel like I'm watching the same battle that I had watched earlier in the film. So yeah, just all these different battles. Too long, too repetitive. What about you, Jeff?
Football game. I did not like that scene. That whole sequence is boring. And when I watch this movie, I tend to skip over that scene. As far as the bug battle, they are a centerpiece of the movie. I didn't have as much of a problem with them, mostly because the film is Starship Troopers. I was hoping to see battle scenes, and they definitely deliver a bunch of them. One of the things that's annoying about them is how terrible the tactics for our human heroes seem to be. A lot of it is just people with rifles running around getting mauled by these giant insects. And it's like, you guys have apparently no concept of small unit tactics. Your only weapons are assault rifles, miniature nuclear bombs, and the occasional airstrike. It's like, what kind of military is this?
Yeah, special ops, they are not. That is, yeah.
I am going to go back briefly to the book before we wrap all this up. One of the hallmarks of the book, and one reason why it's seen as a seminal work of military science fiction, is that it's really the introduction of the concept of power armor. The mobile infantry all have these suits of powered armor, these battle suits with multiple weapons and stuff, and each one has like the firepower equivalent to a 20th century tank battalion kind of thing. And there, it makes sense that that's the main weapon system because it's portable and extremely effective. Here, because everyone's running around in t-shirts, it's like, this is a terrible way to fight a war. So, Steph, how many pandas do you give Starship Troopers?
I went straight down the middle and went with 2.5 pandas. This film is a mixed bag, is the best way that I can describe it. It's If you're a sci-fi fan, you should watch it. It belongs in the archives of sci-fi films, especially for the satirical components about fascism and the military propaganda stuff is very entertaining to watch. It also has some interesting scenes about gender neutrality that I found kind of cool to watch. But other than that, it loses points because of the repetitive battle sequences, the needless character of Xander, and then what they did with Dizzy's story arc was extremely disappointing to me. So that's why I went down the middle and said 2.5 pandas for this one. What about you, Jeff?
So I'm giving it 3.5 bug stomping, power armor wearing space pandas. I thought it was a really good satire. Clearly, there are a lot of character issues. I am a bit more forgiving of the battle sequences. I think they are, in general, exciting enough to watch, and the effects work really good. It should definitely be on any sci-fi fans watch list. And on that note, bye.
Bye. Happy watching.
Thank you for joining us for Stream On. Tune in next week when we'll be reviewing The Fair, currently streaming on Amazon. Stream On is a production of Steph and Jeff Wrights Media. Reproduction of this podcast without written consent is prohibited. All rights reserved. 2020.